Hi all. What are some of the approaches for application configuration management in Kubernetes? A few topics I'm interested in is one like dynamic configuration, like let's say a configuration of a feature flag in an application, and the other is deploying applications that share configuration or secrets. So I'm not sure if, yeah, we have, there were a number of replies added here. Vlad, I see you also, brought up some things. Just to point out a few patterns generally I see as it relates to this is one is an operator pattern. So there are a lot of operators out there that help you work with dynamic configurations depending on what you want to do. One of the key things in Kubernetes is that when your config map or secrets change, by design, your pods don't pick it up. That way things remain stable. That way you can still do rolling updates or whatever other strategy you're using for changing or rotating your secrets. Nonetheless, that is a common request that when your config maps change, you want to rotate them. So the Reloader project by Staccator Staccator is one of those. We deploy that in every one of our client engagements with the the Reloader project. What you can do is basically add an annotation that this deployment cares when this secret changes, and when that happens, trigger a rolling update just by invoking whatever mechanism that is in the deployment. So it's not implementing its own operator to handle rolling updates. It just triggers whatever pre-configured behavior is the default for that deployment, for example, or the stateful set. The other thing is like the other common pattern is for secrets. So how are you going to have dynamic configuration of secrets? Again, the pattern is operators. So you have an operator that looks at SSM, for example, or Amazon Secrets Manager and replicates that into your Kubernetes namespace. And then guess what? Use the reloader maybe to reload your apps when that thing changes. So these operators can be tied together. And then Vlad brings up, I think, the more elegant solution that is non-Kubernetes specific. And I think it's an important distinction to make here is that I think a lot of us, and Cloud Posse is part of this, has done this historically a lot, is that we almost use deployments as a feature flag. The act of doing a deployment changes the behavior of the app, maybe by changing some environment variable or things like that. But that's bad habit in the long run, is coupling deployments to features. And a better way of doing this is using a formal feature flagging framework. And there are open source versions of that, and there are commercial versions of that. So Launch Darkly, that Vlad talks about here, is a commercial version of enabling that stuff. And then Flagger is one of several, I think there's 4 or 5 of them now, feature flagging frameworks that are open source.
I'll just add one other quick thing that I've done some pretty extensive feature flag based development. So two things to remember is every time you introduce a new feature flag, you're introducing technical debt.
Yes.
That needs to be gone back and cleaned up at some point once that becomes part of your general release. And then second, in microservice-based architectures, it gets really hairy that you receive the feature flag sort of on the front end usually, and then you have to then somehow in all of your downstream calls put it in a header, and then all those other microservices have to read it from the header and figure that out. And so you're introducing sort of a distributed, potentially distributed tech debt that you have to clean up like later on to figure out what your behavior is, especially if you start to do like canary deployments where you can ramp up and down percentages of traffic or target specific user-based attributes and all of that kind of thing. It can get really hairy. So don't just I would say don't jump into it unless you really have to do it. That's kind of my thing there. It's not an easy thing to take on.
That's a good consideration that I think is not often enough expressed, is that it is a form of tech debt that you gotta come back and factor into the main code if you end up running with that feature permanently. In terms of the headers and all that stuff, that's an implementation detail, and that's ultimately what some of these feature flag frameworks are doing is providing language bindings and the hooks so that that is not
Yeah.
part of your responsibility.
So yeah, I was purely pointing out that in microservice-based architectures, you often are distributing that tech debt in multiple places, like
Yeah.
every place that needs to read that feature flag to do a forked
Yeah, it
forked
cascades
feature,
down to the yeah. It's not just the
yeah,
front end; it cascades to
right,
the back end and whatever other
yeah,
additional
that was
back
my
end.
point.
Yeah,
Yeah.
no, that's a good point. So not to be taken lightly. Any other comments on that? Suggestions? Dynamic configuration in Kubernetes and patterns?
And if you do choose it, I would highly +1 launch Darkly. I've used them a bunch and was very happy with their performance.
Cool. Very cool.
The way we've done it in Azure is using service bus. So we let the service bus, send the messages to all the nodes. And we got really pissed off about it. We were using the event grid, and that sucked. There are some limitations there, and switching to the service bus has been a lot more flexible. We're able to do queues and update, send different messages so that the nodes can know about each other.
I think it's, I just wanted to mention one more thing for the feature flag stuff.
Oh, okay.
Doing something like feature flags gives you much more than this dynamic configuration type stuff.
Yeah, there's a lot more. Yeah.
Yeah, there are other benefits like I teach a DevSecOps class for the DoD, and one of the MTTR, mean time to recover, is a huge pain point in the DoD. Sometimes it can be days or weeks, and doing when we talk about how when you start doing continuous integration and you're pushing code to production every day, but you're not releasing that code yet, it's sitting behind a feature flag, and then you flip the switch on the feature flag. If something all of a sudden goes terribly wrong, you just flip the switch back, right? Yeah. And that just blows everyone's mind. It's like, oh my God, that's amazing, but that's something you can do with feature flags. If there's some terrible issue, you don't have to roll back, you don't have to fix forward, you can just flip the feature flag back.
Yeah. Instant
and
rollback.
If a deployment takes forever, that's a big thing. Being able to roll back in less than a second is a big thing. But this is one of those issues where it depends on the company. It depends how many people there are, how much experience they have with feature flags, what your style of development is. Do you want to do experiments and A/B testing and things like that, and so on and so forth? It's not a purely technical problem. For a tiny startup, just doing M variables is perfect.
Yeah.
Yeah, and sorry not to belabor the point, but the one other thing that really comes into play is your observability story when you're using feature flags, because you really need to, especially if you're doing canaries, send 10% of my traffic to feature 2, where everyone else is using feature version 1, and then being able to look at error rates and resource consumption and throughput and all of that kind of thing, one versus the other, so you can actually figure out, is this new version behaving the same way as the previous version, as far as all those other components, so that I feel safe to roll forward and make that 10% to 20%, 80%, 100% of my user base over time, and understanding how all those things work. So it's not an easy game to get all that right and get all those tools in place to monitor and do feature flagging. So my statement from before is unless you really know what you're undertaking and you have to do it this way because of the size and scale of your organization, I wouldn't recommend it to just anyone.
That's totally prudent advice. Very good. So yeah, I agree with all that. It's an investment in your observability in addition to configurability.